Last week on Women's Day, I launched this channel so I can share all my secrets, everything that I know, everything that I've done in my life, all my tips and advice, and all my experiences to those who can take advantage of it. And today is the day when I begin this journey, and I thought I should start it with my first biggest achievement, because before I was anyone, before I did anything, the first thing that I did do that I feel like was a big achievement was I learned English. I learned how to speak, how to write, and I did pretty much all of it by myself. So today I want to share how I did it, despite living in the slums, despite not having access to English-speaking schools in the beginning, and how I got myself to almost native speaking English. So let's begin. The first thing I want to tell you is why I wanted to learn English. This was way before I thought I would become an activist, I would become an entrepreneur, or I would use this language in any kind of way. I just loved it. I just loved the idea of how light this language feels. I already knew how to speak my tribal language, Brahwi. I also knew how to speak Sindhi, and I also knew how to speak Urdu. And these three languages are actually very different from each other, and they all have their own deliciousness. But when it came to English, I just felt like it made you feel lighter. And we were growing up in such poverty in the slums. And even though as a child, of course, it was amazing. I loved every part of it. Even on the days when we didn't have anything to eat, I just thought it was an adventure, and nothing really felt heavy. But the lightness of this language always attracted me. And in those days, I remember that the TV used to play just 1 hour of cartoons. And each time the cartoons would come on, I wanted to be one of them. I wanted to be this Disney character speaking in such a way that just flowed out of your mouth. And somehow that is how my journey began, in the middle of the slums, in a small, tiny little house made of bricks. And to this day, I'm very grateful for that passion and for that beginning. So how did I begin? The first thing I believe that truly helped me is I used to read a lot of stories. I loved reading books. I grew up reading something called Nonihal. I don't know if you know this. Those of you who know it, please comment below, because it just means so much to me. This book shaped a lot of my magical thinking, a lot of my ability to think that there is possibility in doing whatever you want. So that book is just very important to me. A lot of my reading was in Urdu. I did read a lot of books in Sindhi as well. The first thing that I did was I stopped reading or decreased reading Urdu books and started reading English books. I actually made this little list in my scrapbook where I went and put down numbers, and I planned that as soon as I read and finish a book, I'm going to put it down. It actually ended up being in hundreds. I finished one book after another, one book after another. We would go to this tiny little secondhand bookstore in a little street, and my dad would get me all the books that I would want, and my other siblings as well. And then we would read those and then exchange them for other books. And I feel like reading those books really helped me. Now, here's the thing. Yes, I know that for me to be able to read books, I needed to know how the ABCs worked. A minimum amount of things were taught to us in school. We went to government schools in the beginning. We moved so many times. We moved a lot of times, but each school had their own way of teaching you. Majority of the time, the schools that I went to were government schools who started teaching you English in 6th grade. So before that, even the ABCs were like something mysterious to us. My father tried to teach us how to read the ABCs, how to form words out of them. And as soon as I learned that, it was like a whole new world opened up. I could see this sentence in a newspaper and it would make sense to me. And that is how my love for reading books started as well. Being able to read English and then reading a book that has many sentences and has paragraphs, there is bound to be many words that you don't understand, and that happened to me as well. When I took this issue to my father or to my teachers, they said something very specific. They said, underline that, go take a dictionary and search for that word, and then on top of that with a pencil, write down the meaning of that, and then make sure you also know how the tenses work in these sentences. And somehow that actually scared me. It scared me from learning this language. It scared me from moving forward in reading because it just felt like so much work. When I was reading books, majority of the times I just wanted to know what happened next, even if I was like understanding a minimum amount of it. So I kind of skipped this part. I think to this day my grammar is not that good because of that, because of not listening to my teachers. But when I skipped doing that, it just became so much more easier to read these books and to understand them and to make my own meaning when I wanted to. Now, here's the thing. At some point, one time, when we had finally moved to Karachi and we were living in a tiny little home in a slum community, my father took me on his motorbike and he took me to the secondhand bookstores in Karachi, and that is where I found something called the Archie comics. Here's the fantastic thing that happened. In Archie comics, whenever you wanted to see what the situation was, it was a picture, so you would actually see what Archie is talking about. If it was about a burger, if it was about going somewhere, there were pictures to follow that. So when I was reading the books without pictures, I read a lot of classics. I read Little Women, I read Heidi, and I read The Little Prince. I read books like that before, but when Archie came, it changed my life in this way that it had pictures to follow with everything. And somehow I feel like this really helped me to like reading even more and to understand what people were talking about. It also helped me learn bigger and bigger words very fast. Third thing that I did in my journey to learn English, this is a very, very silly one. Sometimes I would recommend it, sometimes I won't. Just look at the situation and see if it fits you. I actually, anywhere I went, if I thought that the person could speak to me in English, I encouraged them only to speak to me in English. Yes, in school, this actually got me a lot of, pushback because my friends were like, oh, you're trying to be posh, oh, so now you're all kinds of fancy, you want to only speak in English. But it really helped me whenever other people were communicating with me in this language. It helped me because it helped my brain create a response. So in those days, we actually moved again, and then my father took me to a new school, and for the first time, this was an English medium school. When I went there, I actually decided that I'm going to tell everyone that I don't know how to speak any other language but English, because that is how they would continue to speak in English with me. This led to not having a lot of friends, especially in the beginning, until they found out I'm actually a really good person. But people actually were like, who is this person? They would try to speak to me in other languages, in Urdu, basically, and I would pretend I don't understand what they're saying until they would repeat it in English. And this helped me so much. It was just helping build my English skills, but at the same time, it was not helping in building friendships. Eventually, I learned my lesson and I tried to switch between the two, but having conversations with people truly, truly helps. Try this, and I know that it will help you as well. So after I had become a little bit better in English speaking, I actually was realizing that whenever I spoke the sentences, they were not like the Disney cartoons that we were watching. They did not sound at all like anyone else who spoke native English. And that is when I realized that it was because we have an accent. And while it is very cute, people's accents are really cute, but I really wanted to speak English like how I saw on Disney Channel. And so I decided to do this very strange thing. For 2 years, whenever I read books in English, which I did a lot because I love reading, I put a piece of chocolate in my mouth, because I noticed that whenever American or any Western speaks, they seem to have a lot more saliva in their mouth than people who speak Urdu or Hindi and other languages, because our language is slightly dry. Our T is D, our R is R. And so our language actually has a lot of pointy parts, and I wanted to take those points off by having saliva in my mouth. So I put chocolate in my mouth for 2 years. I kept reading and kept gaining weight and kept decreasing my accent. It was incredible what these 2 years did for me, because when I was reading like this with chocolate in my mouth, it was creating that flow. And each time my ears heard that, I actually was realizing that, oh my God, I can do this even without the chocolate. And finally, I started practicing, and it helped so much. After this part, something interesting happened. One night, I woke up from a dream thinking that in the dream, I actually spoke very fluent English. It was very strange somehow to me that I spoke in Brahui at home, a very tribal language. I spoke in Sindhi to my friends, Urdu to my friends, and tried to speak a little bit of Pashtun. But then in my dream, I was very fluent in English. And that is when I was like, what if somehow if I make thinking into English natural? I started practicing thinking in English. And I know that I wasn't always very good at this, because thinking is such a natural thing. It just comes at you, and you need to be ready whenever you need to think about something. But whenever I needed to think specifically about, like, very dramatically, if I was like, oh, where did I put my pen? Or where is this certain book that I'm looking for? I would make myself think in English, and that really helped a lot as well. Try this trick. It might be really helpful for language learning. One more thing that I started doing right after all of these things was I used to watch cartoon with my siblings. By this time I was a teenager, and I still loved watching cartoons, basically because there's 8 of us, 8 siblings, and everybody else is younger, so everybody was always watching cartoons, and that was the only thing we knew, and they're so much fun anyway. I loved Disney. So whenever I watched cartoons, whenever I watched a Disney movie, now I watched it to learn, not just for the story. Now I watched it to see what they're saying, when they're saying it, and how they're saying it. Every time something new came, it was like a new juicy secret to me in English learning, and it really helped a lot in watching these movies. When my father finally brought a computer one day, a really giant machine in our home, my siblings and I were allowed to use it for 10 minutes each. Because there were so many of us, and because my father needed it for work, we could only use it whenever each one of us finished our chores. My chores as the elder daughter were, of course, to help my mom, to cook and clean and everything, and do my homework after coming school. So I got to have those 10 minutes in the evenings, or sometimes very early mornings. And in that time, in that 10 minutes, I started doing something really silly, which was really, really wonderful actually at the same time. I went on these Disney forums. I just typed Disney something, the links that would come in newspapers or magazines. I typed that, and I found emails. Literally, I found emails of young teenagers living in America. And the next thing I did, I made myself an email address. And I started sending all these emails, just random, separately, each one by one, emails asking if they would want to be my pen pals. And I know this was a very brave thing to do as a teenager. And it was also somehow, I didn't even know if they were teenagers or no, but I trusted that because they were on a Disney platform, they must, of course, be my age. Amazingly, I started receiving letters back. I made pen pals in Virginia. I did not even know where Virginia is, why it's called, or how it's even pronounced. But I made pen pals in other places. People responded to me. People sent even their photos of their lives, told me about their homework, and I did the same. And this is when I loved the feeling of writing in English. I started discovering how you can express your feelings in English in a very beautiful way. So I started doing that, and this was a really, really big thing that helped me. One day my dad brought me the book of Anne Frank, and when I read that, it changed my entire life. It showed me so much of the suffering that people had experienced, but at the same time, the power of a young girl and the power in writing more than anything. So that is when I started journaling, and I feel like I've never looked back. I journal so much that I fill one journal after another. We're constantly looking for spaces where we can just shove my journals around because I just need to get things out of my chest. And in journaling, in that time, especially when I was learning English, I found that I was able to have different styles. I was able to have different styles of writing. Like some days, if I was in a good mood, I would write in the style of a very happy Disney character. And some days when I felt very pretty or, on top of the world, I would write in the style of a princess. It was really interesting that every style brought different words. I could use separate words for sentences in separate moods, and that was really fascinating to me. I think that is when my writing career also truly started. I started writing stories. I made my own blog, which is still online. I need to do something about it. It's called The Kaleidoscope of Life. It's on Blogspot. All my blogs from even that time and long after are still there as well. I also, later on, in 2018, wrote my memoir and shared my whole life story to everyone. And I feel like my journey of learning English, my need to learn this language helped me do so many big things. Later, when I became an activist, when I became an entrepreneur, it led me to connect with the global leaders, to connect with people who could help me, to take my message all around the world. And I know that this language has a lot of power. Our beautiful languages need to be preserved. Our tribal languages need to be spoken, but at the same time, if you feel like you want to do something big and connect with the world, you also need to learn English. I hope these tips helped you, and if you have any more questions, please comment below. I'm here to help. I'm hoping that each of my videos will be helpful to you.